historical fiction novel to add to your reading list that's set at the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s is In the Face of the Sun by Denny S. Bryce. In the Face of the Sun is a dual timeline novel. It takes readers on an audacious road trip with a pregnant young woman and her brash aunt from Chicago to Los Angeles to confront a decades-old mystery from 1920s Black Hollywood. In the Face of the Sun by Denny S. Bryce is being published by Kensington Books, and it's a historical novel you really don't want to miss. Welcome to The Reader's Couch, a podcast that brings you lively conversations with some of your favourite authors and bookish personalities. Over here, the couch is always booked, but I've moved some books to the side table and fluffed some cushions so I can welcome a guest or two to come lounge with us. Today on the couch, we have Eliza Knight, and she's here to talk to me about her latest novel, The Mayfair Bookshop, a dual narrative story about Nancy Mitford and a modern American woman desperate for change. And both women are connected through time by a tiny bookshop. Stay tuned. An instant New York Times bestseller and Oprah Book Club selection, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction, finalist for the PEN/Hemingway Award for Debut Novels, longlisted for the National Book Award for Fiction, a finalist for the Kirkus Prize for Fiction, shortlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, longlisted for the Aspen Words Literary Prize, is none other than The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honoré Fanone Jeffers. In the novel, we meet Ailey, and she's a descendant of enslaved Georgians and tenant farmers. She follows in her parents' footsteps and attends an HBCU, and we see her reckon with her ancestral trauma while growing up in the 1980s and 90s. And we also see her family's history from the centuries of the colonial slave trade through the Civil War to the present day. The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois was first published in August 2021, but it's now being published in paperback by Harper Perennial, and it's a multi-generational epic you really don't want to miss. Hi readers, welcome again to The Reader's Couch. I'm your host, Victoria Wood, and here on the couch with me is a USA Today best-selling author of historical novels, and she's here to talk to me about her latest book, The Mayfair Bookshop. Please welcome to the couch, Eliza Knight. Hi, Eliza.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Yay, I'm thrilled to have you here, especially after learning about your book and a bit more about your process at the Epigraph Literary Festival. So now I'm really thrilled that we have the opportunity to really dive in.
Yay.
Amazing. So your book's been out there in the world for some time now. I mean, readers can get their hands on a copy if they haven't already. But I mean, how are you feeling? How excited are you about this new book?
I'm still very, very excited. I've had a chance to speak with readers multiple times now, and I'm just loving the feedback I'm getting. Everyone seems to be really enjoying the book. The reviews have been really great, and I'm just so glad that I finally got to share Nancy's and Lucy's story with the world.
Yep, absolutely. So tell our listeners about the Mayfair Bookshop. Tell us about your novel and what can readers expect when they pick up your book?
Sure. My novel is a dual timeline. It takes place in the 1930s and 40s, and then also there's a present-day modern heroine. So the historical side of the story is Nancy Mitford's narrative. It's a biographical fiction. So Nancy Mitford was famous for her writing during the 1930s and 40s. In fact, one of her books, or a series of books, has been made into TV series and movies. Up until last summer, I believe, was the latest adaptation of her novel, The Pursuit of Love. And she had a pretty interesting life, a lot of turmoil going on with both her career, her family, her romantic relationships. And I've always just been sort of fascinated with her. So I really enjoyed digging into her story and being able to share that with the world. There's some interesting tidbits about her writing career, but also with her family. She has some sisters who are Nazi sympathizers, which of course is a huge struggle for her. And then her husband wasn't always very faithful. So that was sort of a sad relationship there that was a little bit depressing to explore. But in the end, I think she found her happiness. And then in the modern day side of the book, we have Lucy St. Clair, who is actually a fictional character that I created, who is traveling to London to work as a book curator in the bookshop that Nancy worked in during World War II. And while she's there for her own career aspirations, she's also there on a personal quest to solve a mystery that she and her mother had been sort of digging into for fun over the last decade or so. And now that her mother's passed away, she wants to continue on with that legacy. And the mystery is an inscription to a friend of Nancy's in one of Nancy's novels. And they hadn't been able to figure out exactly who this friend was. So she's sort of digging into Nancy's history and learning things through there. And one of the mediums in which I did that with was letters, because Nancy was a huge, prolific letter writer. In fact, you can find multiple books today that have published hundreds of her letters with her friends and family members.
Yes, absolutely. And I love the letters kind of being woven into the novel as well. But yeah, let's get into Nancy a bit. I mean, for some readers, they might be familiar with her as an individual, but, you kind of highlighted a few things about her in your description. I thought she was quite the socialite, kind of living that high life, but then she marries a man who unfortunately has a big drinking problem. Mm-hmm. He also starts seeing other women and just a lot of stuff going on. And he's also a reckless spender. Right. So Nancy ends up being forced to also work, even though she found comfort at the Hayward Hill Bookshop. But tell us a bit about Nancy and what happens with her and her sister and her husband, and just kind of what led her to this bookshop to begin with.
Sure. So Nancy had been in a relationship when she was younger for a number of years with a man she thought she was going to marry, and it didn't end up working out. And since she was getting older, she was about 30 or so, she sort of felt like she was going to be headed into spinsterhood. And Peter asked her sort of as a joke at a party while he was drinking if she would marry him. And she said yes, which he didn't expect because he had asked multiple women that night if they would marry him. And she decided to take it seriously because she wanted to get married and she found him charming and funny. And he was also sort of like a male socialite, and she thought they might be able to get along well. But on her honeymoon, she discovered she didn't actually enjoy his company that much, but maybe that was just, her not feeling well or having a sprained ankle while they were there. So she puts her whole heart into it. And it just turns out that he is kind of really a very selfish person. Like, he is a drinker. He can't seem to hold a job because he enjoys partying too much, and also has kind of a pretty high opinion of himself that maybe he doesn't need to be working, or his bosses don't think he's that great. And so he doesn't really think that holding a job is that important. And in the meantime, he can just survive off of the small, meager allowances that his parents send them and her parents, and Nancy can go work. Nancy can write another book. Nancy can do this and that, which, she does to the best of her ability. And it's a little bit embarrassing for her when the bailiffs are knocking on the door trying to collect his debt, which he's out spending at various clubs and restaurants while she's at home trying to work. So she's a little disappointed with that. And when the war starts, World War II, she needs to make some money. He's off on the front doing his job, but as a soldier. But unfortunately, they didn't make very much money, and it was pretty much covering his own expenses. So she started to work at the bookshop that was owned by her friends. And she wasn't making very much, but it was enough to sort of survive. And she really kind of fell in love with working there. She enjoyed the book atmosphere. Obviously, she was a writer and she was a huge reader. As children, her and her siblings, part of their best education was this massive library that the family had. And they read pretty much everything that was in there. So for her, she's kind of in her element, and she invites her friends there, other socialites, and literary people, and they sort of form something that they call Nancy's Salon. And, so they're just hanging out in the bookshop constantly talking and chatting, and it's just become sort of like a fun place for her. But during this time, she's also discovering her sisters are politically not aligned with Britain. So the one sister, Unity, had decided before the war started that she wanted to learn German. So she went to Germany. She was living in Munich. But unbeknownst to her family, her main goal of moving there, besides learning German, was to meet Hitler. She was a huge fan of Hitler. She thought him very charming and handsome. And so she found out where he hung out, and she went to lunch there every day waiting for him to show up, which he did eventually. And she inserted herself in his life. She actually became very close with him. In fact, during the war, he confiscated an apartment from a Jewish family and gave it to her. She was always at his house, at his parties, friends with his friends. And there's a rumor that they were romantically involved, but that is not substantiated with any evidence. It's just, rumors, because she was always there. So this obviously bothers Nancy a lot. And she tries to talk to her sister about it, but her sister doesn't care, doesn't want to hear about it. And in fact, Nancy takes up another project with her writing where she kind of pokes fun at her sister's fascism and obsession with Hitler. And the book kind of flops because it's a tongue-in-cheek sort of story, but it just really doesn't hit the mark when they're actually fighting Germans and, Nazis are torturing people. So then at the same time, she also discovers that her other sister, Diana, has decided to leave her husband, who was one of the Guinness heirs, and she has decided to become the lover of another fascist man who was the leader of the British Union of Fascists. And she has also decided to become friends with Hitler. In fact, Hitler was a witness at her secret wedding in Germany and friends with her and her husband. So at this point, Nancy's kind of despondent, like, what's going on with my sisters? They're Nazi sympathizers. They're friends with Hitler. This is crazy. Our country's at war with him. He wants to invade. He's bombing the city. He's killing people we know. And so she's asked by the government what she thinks about what's happening. And she says that her sisters are dangerous. And in fact, she believes that she's the reason that her sister Diana is arrested. Although fact is probably it was the Guinness father who actually wrote a letter saying like she probably needs to be in jail. She's actually traveling to Germany and like giving secrets and things. So, but at one point when Diana wants to be released and the parliament is thinking about allowing that release, Nancy goes to the government and says, you cannot let her out. She's extremely dangerous. And the thing is that she's so beautiful and charming that everyone will believe her. And that's even more dangerous. So she really was very instrumental, I think, in keeping her sister in jail. But at the same time, she is telling her sister, writing her sister letters about, oh, I hope you're doing well, and sending gifts and visiting with her children and letting Diana know her children are doing well. So it's kind of two-faced, but I think that was the only way she could really cope because, she loved the sister that wasn't a fascist and a Nazi lover. And I think she hoped that that would go away at some point, which kind of is proven because later on when Diana lives in France at the same time Nancy does, they were really close. And she never actually told her sister her involvement with keeping her in jail. Diana didn't find out about that till after Nancy died, and at which point she was pretty heartbroken about it. But also, she was friends with Hitler, so she kind of wasn't a very good person. Yeah, so that's like her major problems with those two sisters. And then she, all the sisters kind of had a lot of things going on. One of the younger sisters, Jessica, was a communist and had run away with the nephew of Churchill, married him, eloped over in Spain, and then wouldn't come home. And when they finally got her to come home, she was in London only for a short time when tragedy hit her and her young husband. And then they immigrated to the United States, where she remained living for the rest of her life.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So the modern day narrative focuses on Lucy St. Clair. Now, she arrives at the same bookstore Nancy worked at, the Haywood Hill bookstore, but she's there to kind of curate a collection of books for an actual collector. But while she's there, she takes the opportunity to look into a woman named Iris, who Nancy had an inscription written in one of her books. So tell us a bit about Lucy St. Clair, who she is, what's going on in her life, and what happens when she arrives at the bookstore.
Sure. So Lucy had been a fan of Nancy Mitford for a very long time. It was her mother's favorite author, so they read the books together. And her mom had a first edition that she had actually bought at the Haywood Hill Bookshop a couple of decades before. And written on the inside was a little note to this friend Iris from Nancy. But in all of the letters and research that they had done, they never actually discovered anyone that could be this Iris person. So it's sort of like a game they've been playing, like, who's Iris? Let's figure it out. So when Nancy's given the opportunity by her boss to go work at Haywood Hill for a couple of weeks on this special project, she obviously jumps at the chance because she wants the promotion that is being afforded her, but she also really, really wants to be able to dig in further into this sort of little mystery that her and her mother had been working on. So she arrives and she's doing her job there, and at the same time, sort of reading some letters, trying to follow this mystery path. And in the end, she does discover who Iris is, which is a nickname that Nancy had for a friend. But Nancy had nicknames for all of her friends, which I had to tone down a lot in the book because it became way too much. But that was one of the things Nancy and her sisters did. Everyone had a funny nickname.
Right. Awesome. Okay, so tell us a bit, Eliza, about your inspiration for the novel. Where did your idea to tell this story come from? What was the spark? What inspired you to put pen to paper?
Sure. So I've always been a fan of Nancy ever since high school. A history teacher used to assign us novels from the time periods that we were studying. And one of the ones that she assigned us was The Pursuit of Love. So I fell in love with that book a long time ago. And then when I was in college, I was studying family studies. And one of the classes that I was taking was on family dynamics and sibling relationships, and how they can run the gamut of pretty much everything. So my professor brought up the Mitford family, which was the 7 siblings, 1 brother, 6 sisters, and how very different they were, and how they were really sort of seen as, I want to say, like the Kardashians of the time, like very super popular socialites, but I'm not a particular fan of the Kardashians. So I don't know if I like that connection, but in any case, they were just really kind of a very interesting and fascinating family. So at that time, I really enjoyed studying them and the history behind their family. But I never thought about writing about Nancy until a little bit later. It's just, I write biographical fiction, and this is my 6th novel, but that family was very, very, it just seemed a little bit more difficult to study and research, and Nancy's personality was so large, I wasn't sure I'd be able to get it right. So it was kind of something I wanted to do, but I was a little bit nervous to do it. And then in early 2020, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it. So in January, I sent a proposal to my agent, and she said, I love this. Let's talk to your editor. My editor loved it. So I started writing. And then the pandemic hit, and my kids all came home from school. My husband was stuck overseas for work for several months. And so there's like chaos going on in my house, everybody trying to figure out how to survive on the internet and not leave, and all that sort of nutso stuff that we went through. So my escape was really diving into the Mitford family and the research and writing their story. So I think a lot of the emotion that I was experiencing during that time came out on the page. And then as far as Lucy goes, I love a good mystery. I love solving mysteries. So I had fun with her sort of digging into things. But a job I always thought would be very cool is a book curator, where you get to pick out someone else's library and do research on books. Yeah, it just seems like such a fun thing. So I pretty much lived vicariously through her. And her story originally was a lot bigger than it turned out to be in the novel, because I needed more space for Nancy and her family. Originally, Lucy also had a bad relationship with a guy. He was very challenging for her, and it sort of ruined a lot of her trip. So I took him out completely. And you can actually see a deleted scene on my website in the book club guide. There's a deleted first chapter where we get to meet her horrible boyfriend, who didn't end up making the cut for the book.
Right, absolutely. So you guys head on over to Eliza's
Yeah.
website to get that juicy tidbit. But how long did it take for you to kind of pull this novel together? Because, hearing about you writing and navigating everything through lockdown, but from start to finish, how long would you say it took for you to pull the Mayfair Bookshop together?
So I wrote the first few chapters in January of 2020. After that, I think I finished it by maybe August or so, July maybe. Then I sent it out to multiple readers. I have critique partners and readers and things like that so that they could go through it. And then I turned it in December of that year after revising it again, after getting back feedback from my friends. So that was probably about a year before I turned it in. As far as research, I have like a stack of over a dozen books, biographies, books of letters that she wrote with her siblings, her friends, including the bookshop owner of Haywood Hill, and her notes with other friends and things like that. And I really dug into the history of her family as well. So I read the biographies that were, and the autobiographies that were written by her sisters and then other people, obviously. So that was a big part of it. And then I worked with the British Library. I got some transcripts and things from different broadcasts during World War II, and they were very nice and helpful over the internet. And then after that, I think I got my edits back the following April. So I worked on those and sent those back. And then that summer we had first galley reads. So like the whole process probably took about a year and a half. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to travel during that time because of the pandemic. But I was really excited to see last fall, my daughter, my oldest daughter, goes to Ohio State University. And at the university is a Mitford collection in the rare book room where she happens to work. So I was able to get an appointment and go with her and actually like hold letters and read letters that Nancy had written her sister Jessica, and actually a letter that Peter had written to Jessica during the time where she had run away to Spain. So that was really, really cool to actually like hold those in my hands. It was just neat.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds really cool. So, as I mentioned in my intro, and you actually said here, this is your sixth novel. You've written historical novels before. You also write historical romance, but I'm going to focus on traditional historical novels here. Two I knew prior were My Lady Viper and Prisoner of the Queen. Now you have the Mayfair Bookshop. How would you say it was similar to or different from writing those previous books?
Sure. So I think one of the things that is kind of steady in all the books I write is that I really, really like to pick women who are really interesting and challenging to sort of research, but then also get their personality on the page. And some of my heroines are considered more like anti-heroines, is what I've heard people say, because they're typically seen as sort of sharp or caustic or not very nice all the time out in the world. And that's just how people have perceived them, obviously from their actions or things they might have said. But for me, I always find people like that to be really fascinating because I feel like there's something that they're hiding inside. There's some sort of pain that they're going through, and I want to dig in and figure out what that is, like what makes you tick. So like in My Lady Viper, the reason that I even titled it that is because someone wrote a poem about her in which they called her a viper because she was just sort of nasty. I dug into her history and sort of figured out like why she might have been that way. And I did the same thing with Nancy. I wanted to know why people thought she wasn't very nice. And I think I kind of portrayed that very well in the story, hopefully at least.
No, absolutely, for sure. And looking back on your writing life, if you could tell your younger self anything, standing here, again, 6 historical fiction novels in, again, I know you also have historical romance, but what would you tell your younger writing self if you could?
I think I probably would have told myself to get started earlier. So I always wanted to be a writer. And when I was in college, I actually started with journalism. I was a journalism major for a year and a half. And one of my professors was actually getting very irritated with me because I was sort of embellishing obituaries and sporting events that I was writing about. And because it was really, I wanted to be writing fiction. And I found the straight facts to be a little bit boring. So I was just adding some things to make it more flowy and colorful. So I think what I would have done is insisted that instead of doing family studies that I be allowed to do an English major. So what happened was I wanted to switch to English to pursue a writing career. And my parents were concerned that I wouldn't be able to get a job, starving artist sort of thing. So I switched to family studies, which I think still helped, except afterwards, then I worked in social work for a number of years and I wasn't writing. And ultimately, I came back to it. And I wish that I had just gone straight into it.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I know it's something we struggle with. Do we pursue our passions or do something practical?
Right.
Absolutely. But before we kind of move out of your writing life a bit, are you working on any other books right now? Do you have any plans for new books in the future? Any more historical novels or maybe something new? Are you working on anything right now? What can you tell us?
So I'm actually contracted for 3 more books. I just finished writing a novel about Adele Astaire, who was the sister of Fred Astaire. It takes place during the 1930s, 20s, 30s, 40s. And it's about her life as a dancer and personal struggles that she goes through. At the time, she was actually the more famous of the 2 dancers. So her story is very fascinating. She is a very funny woman, and I really enjoyed writing that. And then now I am currently working on a novel of Queen Elizabeth during World War II, but also her dog Susan, who was the very first corgi gifted to her, all her own. Their family had corgis before that, but this was her corgi, Susan, who she even took with her on her honeymoon. She snuck her under some blankets. Mm-hmm. So I'm telling that story, and it's actually in the Queen's point of view, but also in the dog's point of view, which has been very fun.
Ooh.
Yeah. And then a friend and I are co-authoring a book called They Were Friends, which is the story of Ella Fitzgerald and Marilyn Monroe.
Wow. Okay. So you have 2 books on the way. That's amazing. Really excited to see more about what they are. Hopefully get my hands on an early copy. But yeah, that's really exciting. So we have something to look forward to. So that's amazing.
Yes.
Okay, so getting into your reading life real quick. I know we're here to talk about the Mayfair Bookshop, but we want to know what you're reading. So share with us, tell us about the last book you finished reading that you'd now recommend.
Sure. Well, I'm currently reading 2 books. One is The Lincoln Highway by Amor Tolles and What Happened to the Bennets by Lisa Scottoline. And I am loving both of those so much right now. I also recently finished a thriller on Audible, which was The Wrong Family by Taryn Fisher. So I like to read a lot of different stuff.
No, absolutely. Well, you're in good company because I love reading different books and different genres.
Me too.
But what books are you looking forward to reading in the year ahead? Like, what's on your TBR list?
Oh, I really, really want to read The Bloomsbury Girls by Natalie Jenner. That looks really, really good. And there's a thriller that I just saw, Dead Against Her by Melinda Lee. I really want to read that.
Awesome. Sounds good. So in addition to loving our authors and books and reading and everything of the same sort, we also love our indie bookstores. So I ask all our guests on the show. So of course, I'm going to ask you as well to share with our listeners some of your favorite indie bookstores.
Sure. One of my very favorites is called A Likely Story. It's in Sykesville, Maryland. I love that shop. The owner is super great with authors. She loves to pull in authors for different chats, but she's also really good at picking out books, and she's just very nice, and I like her a lot, and their shop is really cute. And then there's another shop in my town that just opened called The Last Word, and they have a great selection of books, but also so many book gifts. Like, one of my favorite things to give people is different sort of book things, like shirts that talk about reading and socks that have like library cards on them. And they have candles that are based on different books there. So I really enjoy that.
Amazing. So kind of wrapping things up and, tying it all together with the Mayfair Bookshop. I mean, I know you've done your job as an author. You've written the book. You've given it to us. We're reading it, loving on it. But in an ideal world, I guess you could say, what are some of the reactions you're hoping for, or just maybe some thoughts you're hoping readers might have after they turn the last page on the Mayfair Bookshop?
Sure. One of the things that I really hope is that people feel like I did Nancy's voice justice, which I have heard that people really think I did. So I like that. A lot of people think that the letters in the novel were actually written by Nancy, but I wrote those myself. So I think I did a good job of getting her voice across. But the other thing is that I really hope people take away from it is sort of like a goal of finding their own happiness, like doing something for themselves every day or every week or every month that's just for you, whether it's, taking that time to sit down and read instead of doing a chore, or going to get your nails done, or taking a long walk in nature, something like that, or realizing a dream or a goal. That's really what I hope people take from it.
Oh, amazing. Eliza, thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It has been so fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to The Reader's Couch. You can find out more about the show and submit your questions for our guest by visiting our website, thereaderscouch.com. You can also connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Couch is Booked. If you like the show, please subscribe, share, and take a few seconds to leave a rating and review. Next week, I'll be back with new guests, more books, and some fun games we can play. But until then, stay lounging, stay reading, and whenever you're in doubt, go straight to your local bookstore or library. Thanks for listening, and happy reading.